Assalamu alaikum. It is Thursday, so it is time for us to chat, for us to talk. So today we are going to talk about health, where we are in terms of our health as a nation, as an ummah, and what does it exactly mean to eat like the Prophet? So let us break this down a little bit. If you are just tuning in for the first time, my name is Mubaraka Ibrahim. I am your health and happiness coach. I have recently launched my podcast, and the fortunate thing for everyone who joins me in my social media tribe is that every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can find me recording my podcast live on air because I understand that not everybody listens to podcasts. You obviously follow me on social media because you like following me on social media. So, this whole introduction to what I'm doing will be cut out on the podcast. So, we record our podcast live right here. So make sure that you are following me, that you have your notifications on, because sometimes we engage in conversation as well right here on Facebook and Instagram. And I think I'm also on YouTube. I'm spreading my tentacles. I'm spreading my tentacles. So we are going to get ready to jump into it, guys. We are going to talk a little bit about, let's talk about health. How about that? Okay. So let's record a podcast. You're listening to the Fit Muslima podcast, where we discuss the interconnection between food, faith, and fitness. I'm your host, Mubaraka Ibrahim. This podcast, my social media presence, and my weekly newsletter all focus on the philosophy that physical, mental, and spiritual well being is intertwined. The weakness of one weakens them all, and the strengthening of one strengthens them all. This is episode 5 of the Fit Muslima podcast. And today I want to sort of talk about health and what does it mean to be healthy, and how do Muslims in particular interpret the way that we eat, the way that we move, and how do we apply some of the principles of the Sunnah to our lives. So, I want to start off by talking a little bit about what is a definition of health, right? Health, if you ask 10 people, you will get 10 different answers because it is completely relative. So that's the first thing. What's healthy and fit for one person is not healthy and fit for someone else. So a mom who had a baby a year ago and still have some baby weight to lose and is trying to drop 20 pounds and get enough energy to run after her toddler, her definition of health and wellness is very different than someone who has type 2 diabetes and is 100 pounds overweight and is taking medication for high blood pressure, right? Both of their definitions and their goals for being healthy are going to be very different. But when we talk about health, we do have some very definitive parameters that we know medically, scientifically, right? What constitutes as someone who is healthy in terms of not only without disease, but also have the ability to combat disease and illness, right? A person who gets the flu isn't necessarily unhealthy. They just happen to get the flu, and their body has to go through a process that is a very normal and natural process to get them back to a state of homeostasis. So, I want to talk about sort of what those definitions are and how do we look at it like overall, because I think that one of the reasons why we have so many convoluted messages about what health and wellness is because we deal sort of off of misdated information, misinformation, right? And all of these things really do affect what we think of when it comes to health and wellness. I think of health and wellness first to be without disease, right? And what are some of the most common diseases that exist not just in the United States of America, but all over the world? Metabolic dysfunction, which we will go into what's metabolically healthy and what is not. Um, it is a worldwide problem, and one of the main things which you will hear me talk about a lot on my podcast and pretty much any platform that gives me a mic is I'm going to talk a lot about insulin resistance and diabetes and what how that affects us, because it is truly an epidemic. We all know that obesity itself is an epidemic and is at epidemic proportions in just about every place in the world. Even if it's lower than where you are, it's still at epidemic proportions, literally worldwide, not just in Western countries, but also in countries that we stereotypically and wrongly assume is automatically healthy, right? So let's talk a little bit about, first, let's go over sort of diabetes, right? We talked about diabetes in some previous episodes and exactly what that is. The main focus that I really talk about is type 2 diabetes, but we will talk a little bit about type 1 diabetes and its prevalence as well. So, type 2 diabetes, I am adamant that type 2 diabetes must truly be looked at as a hormonal dysfunction, because it is a dysfunction of the insulin hormone. Your body it has a reduced ability to actually be able to use insulin to bring food and nutrients into the cells. The cells are, excuse me, resistant to insulin, right? Insulin resistance. This results in type 2 diabetes. It is not just an epidemic inside of the United States. In fact, where I live in the United States, is not even on the top 15 countries of having the highest rate of diabetes. According to the World Health Organizations, Saudi Arabia actually ranks the second highest in the Middle East, and the seventh in the world for the rate of diabetes. Diabetes in Dubai averages 15.2%, with the population of the Emirates having an even higher rate of 19%. And we are talking people who are specifically Emirati. When they look at the general population, the Emirati population has about a 19% rate of diabetes, and expats only about a 14.7. I shouldn't say only, because that's still extremely high. So even among nations that we stereotypically think are quote unquote healthy, they are also battling with some serious health issues. So when we look at countries in Asia, right? We tend to think, oh, Chinese people are healthy, Japanese people are healthy. Even among their population, they are seeing an epidemic of both diabetes and obesity. 13.5% of Japanese population now either has type 2 diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance, which means insulin resistance. The prevalence of diabetes in Japan has increased from 13.7 to 22.1 million people just between 1997 and 2007 alone, and it continues to go up. And so these are actually older statistics. It is even higher now. One of the other myths that we tend to project is that people in India, they're vegan and they're healthy, right? So despite the fact that it's a myth that Indians are vegan, being vegan is actually a Hindu practice, religious practice, not an Indian one. Obesity and diabetes are at record proportions in India. India has an estimated 77 million people with diabetes, which makes it the second most affected in the world after China. Yes, even China, that we think in our mind, in our stereotypes, in our myths, Chinese people are healthy. 1 in 6 people in the world, 1 in 6 people in the world have diabetes, and 17% of them are from India. I want to actually give you some actual statistics, up to date statistics. So, top 10 countries in the world that have a high obesity rate. The number one country in the world with the percentage of its population that has type 2 diabetes is Pakistan. 30.8% of the population in Pakistan has type 2 diabetes. Second is French Polynesia. Third is Kuwait. Fourth is New Caledonia. Fifth is Northern Mariana Islands. Sorry about that. Fifth is Nauru. Sixth is the Marshall Islands. Seventh is Mauritius. And eighth is Kiribati. I actually have no idea where Kiribati is. I knew all the other ones, but I don't know where Kiribati is. And the next is in Egypt. 20.9% of Egyptians have type 2 diabetes. I'm speaking from the United States of America, and for us, it's an epidemic as well, but our percentage of diabetes is at 11.3%. So we're actually not even in the top 15 countries in the world who has the highest population of people who are diabetic. In the United States, of all of the people who are diabetic, 11.3, 95% of them are type 2 diabetic. So this is a significant distinction. Type 2 diabetes is a food and lifestyle related illness, right? It is what we call a preventable illness, right? We have actually changed the terminology around diabetes because we know that it is not just something people happen to get because your mother got it, or always people say, oh, it runs in my family. Oftentimes also no one runs in your family, but that's a different story. And as well, it's not just that the disease runs in the family or you have a genetic propensity towards it. You also have traditions that actually exacerbate and bring on disease, such as, hey, in my family, a good family time is watching a movie as opposed to going outside and having a game of football, right? In my family, a good time is maybe you are uh, cooking your favorite meal that is full with lots of carbohydrates and fats and all of the things that actually exacerbate and bring on disease. So we don't just pass down disease, we also pass down recipes. We also pass down habits. So that is also a part of what we think is um, what we as general population think of hereditary. It's not just the disease. You have to bring out the difference between correlation and causation, right? And that's a very hard thing to tease out, particularly when it comes to things like diabetes. Diabetes is just one part of metabolic health, right? When we talk about metabolic health, what exactly is that, right? Again, from what we said at the beginning, when we think about healthy, it's different for everyone. But as medical professionals, as researchers, as people who are committed to helping people live longer and more vibrant lives, there has been an effort to sort of define what this means, right? What does it mean for somebody to be metabolically healthy? So, the University of California, they had a group that actually did a study, and they defined metabolic health, meaning that your body is able to respond to food in a beneficial way that reduces your risk of conditions such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver, right? Those are the 6 most prevalent preventable diseases that we have in the world. When we think of metabolic health, what the university did was they looked at things that was an indication of metabolic health, that the body is able to prevent these diseases. And they looked at waist circumference, they looked at blood pressure, they looked at cholesterol, they looked at triglycerides. They looked at each one of these things, and what they noted was that most people in the United States were actually not metabolically healthy. Only 12% of the US population is considered metabolically healthy based on the fact that they do not have one or more of these diseases. That is very significant. The fact that of everybody, right? Only that most people in the United States are not metabolically healthy, even if you're not overweight. Someone can be technically not overweight on a BMI scale, but they are have high blood pressure medication. They're on high blood pressure medication. Their cholesterol might be up, right? All of these things will also increase their risk of developing heart disease, developing diabetes. Diabetes isn't always attached to weight. You don't have to be 100 pounds overweight to actually get diabetes. You can get diabetes in a much lower weight. You don't have to be overweight at all. When we think about metabolic health, now we want to think about, so if we are not metabolically healthy, what are some of the most impactful things that we can do in order to improve our metabolic health or to prevent ourselves from becoming metabolically unhealthy? There are many things that we can do depending on where we are in our health status, but we are going to talk a little bit about it from I want to talk today a little bit about it from an Islamic perspective, right? I want to talk a little bit about how Muslims as a whole, how do we interpret and try to apply concepts from the Quran and Sunnah to our health and well-being, right? This is a topic that isn't talked about enough, in my opinion. And it's also often mismatched with what we're doing and how we are doing it, right? So we are in the month of Ramadan. I get lots and lots of flack during this month of Ramadan because I remind people who have type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes that dates are really high on the glycemic index, right? That dates actually, let me rephrase that. Dates can create a huge insulin spike for people with insulin resistance, particularly people with diabetes. It can create a huge insulin spike. And I know people are, and because I've read all of the comments, I've seen all of the hate. I've gotten the messages, right? Dates are the sunnah, and you should break your fast with dates, and you should eat dates every day. And this is one of those concepts. So now that I have, this platform, I'm going to try to sort of like convey to you what I mean when I do my 20-second or 90-second reels or make my posts. So when we think about people, and I'm specifically speaking about people with insulin resistance, and insulin resistance shows up in many different ways, right? For women, it can show up in developing PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Prediabetes is a form of insulin resistance. Diabetes, type 1, is a form of insulin resistance. Type 2 diabetes is not technically insulin resistance because the pancreas itself just simply does not produce insulin. So it is a different type of disease. So I want to specifically talk in terms of how what we eat is not just about the food itself. We have to begin to look at our diet and how we apply the sunnah and how we apply nutrition holistically, right? So, when I tell people that if you have diabetes, that dates should either be eliminated or really minimized, like you're having a half a date if it's a majul date to break your fast. One, I would like to remind everybody that breaking your fast with water is a sunnah as well. Number two, my second reminder is breaking your fast with dates is a sunnah. It is not fard, right? It's sort of like an example that I often use is drinking milk is also a sunnah, but there are many people who are lactose intolerant and they don't insist on drinking milk because they know that their body does not respond to milk in a healthy manner. If you have a disease and such as diabetes and insulin resistance and you eat something that your body does not respond in a healthy manner, it is not healthy for you. It may be a sunnah that is not appropriate for you, right? We know that there are many sunnahs and they're all not appropriate for everyone, right? We know this when it comes to food, right? This is why I tell people there's no such thing as a universally healthy food, right? We say this all the time. This is a superfood or this is a healthy food. And I get questions all the time. Should I eat this? Is this healthy? And my response is probably what most people don't want to hear, which is I can't tell you if it's healthy for you or not because I don't know you. Tomatoes are a perfectly healthy food. They're actually really, really good for prostate cancer, right? Guys out there, right? Research has shown that men who consume tomatoes on a regular basis have a lower rate of prostate cancer. It has an antioxidant called lycopene, which is increased 200% when the tomato is cooked. So, cooked tomatoes in particular for you guys. Tomatoes, raw tomatoes are really high in vitamin C, right? We know it boosts the immune system. Vitamin C has lots of benefits. But if you have acid reflux, that's probably not a healthy food for you. If you are allergic to acidic foods, that's probably not a healthy food for you. So there's no such thing as a universally healthy food. You have to think about what is your current health status and what is your goals and eat according to that. My bigger issue really sort of in how we tend to apply the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when it comes to eating is we piecemeal it, bits and pieces here and there, and we apply what we want and we don't apply what we don't want, right? And all of that is well and good, but it can also actually make things worse for you because it's not just about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He ate dates, right? For many of his meals, as described in the Sunnah, the date was the meal. But we get up in the morning and I'm going to have 7 dates, which is said to protect you from magic. Most people today, I'm just going to make an assumption that most people, particularly in Western countries, Allahu alam, but when you wake up, I don't think the first thing on our list of the things that we're trying to avoid that day is somebody casting a magic spell on us. I'm just saying, food for thought. The second thing is, as described in many hadith, the date was the meal. We're eating dates. I'm having 7 dates this morning, and then I'm going to have some grits and some eggs and some sausages. It becomes just a precursor to everything else we want to eat, right? So I really think that when we think of and try to apply the principles of the sunnah of the prophet's eating, that we have to take several things into consideration, right? We one have to take into consideration that he lived 1500 years ago in Arabia. I live in the United States of America, where there is refrigeration, stoves, trucks that can bring me, and airplanes and boats that can bring me fruits from and vegetables from all over the world, right? Completely different circumstances. There are certain things that are in the sunnah that are circumstantial to his time and to his day. One of those examples is oftentimes people will say, well, the Prophet ﷺ did not eat meat every day, right? They did not eat a lot of meat, very rarely ate meat. During the time of the Prophet, eating meat was very expensive. It would be the equivalent of today, we said, well, I don't eat lobster every day. I don't eat caviar every day. I have it periodically. I personally don't, I've never had caviar. The idea of it is, so this is just an example. The idea of caviar does not sit well with me, but that would be the equivalent. But it doesn't mean that we should not eat meat because the Prophet ﷺ didn't eat it every day. That was his circumstances, right? So we have to be able to to discern between what's circumstantial and what is actually encouraged, right? We also have to look and see what are the habits that he had as general habits that's not necessarily connected to circumstance, but his example, right? So when we let's look at circumstance first, right? And then let's look at some of the things that he did as a habit and a lifestyle. So when it comes to circumstance, right? When we say, well, I'm going to eat something because the Prophet ﷺ eat it, my next question is, are you going to not eat the things that he didn't eat? Right? Because if we're applying the sunnah, then we have to sort of, where's your parameters of where you are applying the sunnah? Like, I would actually think that we would create a phenomenal health transformation if you literally went 1 year and you ate nothing that the Prophet ﷺ did not eat, and you only ate what he ate. Even today, we're not 1500 years ago, and you fasted the way he fasted. Complete health transformation, right? The Prophet ﷺ did not even have white flour. Think of all the things that we eat today that is made with white flour. He ﷺ did not eat rice. Most of the world's diet today is based on rice. So if we think about what he didn't eat as much as we think about what he ate, right? Because we're adding on to what we're already doing. He didn't eat fried chicken, biryani, baklava. None of those things are inside of the sunnah. Let me clarify. I am not saying that it is haram to eat those things. I'm just saying that if you are going to truly look at following the example of the diet of the Prophet ﷺ, don't pick and choose just what you want to add. You have to think about what you take away as well. When we look at how the Prophet ate, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he certainly did not eat 3 meals a day. Certainly did not. I am a huge believer that if we ate less, we could cure most of what ails us. And this is even before we get into fasting. This is before we get into fasting. If you ate less and then ate less often, you can cure most of what ails you. When we talk about eating less, let's talk about one specific hadith that is often said, and people sort of like post it just to feel as if it is great advice, right? Which is the 1/3, right? I know everybody listening to me that's Muslim knows this hadith. I don't think I know a Muslim that don't know this hadith, right? The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that a Muslim should fill his belly with 1/3 food, 1/3 drink, and 1/3 air. So here is the problem. We're only quoting the end of the hadith. The beginning of the hadith actually says that a believer only needs enough food to keep his back straight. And then if he must, 1/3 food, 1/3 drink, and 1/3 air. That is literally supposed to be the maximum. But we never quote the beginning of the hadith. That you're technically recommended to eat less than that. That is the maximum. He said, but if he must, then you do 1/3. So again, this is another example that I see far too often. We pick and choose the little things that are great sound bites, that sounds like something that we want to do, that's easy for us to do, to make us think that we can, that we're doing something. But you have to take more than just sound bites. One of the things that we need to really think about is eating less. The second thing is eating less often. Eat less often. I'm going to tie this back to what we talked about in the very beginning. Diabetes. How does this tie back to diabetes? Diabetes happens from an excess consumption of carbohydrates. That is how we develop diabetes on the base level. An excess consumption of not protein, of not fat, an excess consumption of carbohydrates. Why? The mechanism of developing insulin resistance that leads to diabetes comes from having chronically high blood glucose levels. Your blood glucose rises anytime you consume carbohydrates in particular, right? So there's 3 macronutrients. There's fat, there's protein, and there's carbohydrates. When you consume fat, you have, if any, a very small rise in a blood glucose. Sometimes your blood glucose does not rise at all. When you consume protein, small rise in blood glucose, right? If you have a blood glucose monitor, a continuous blood glucose monitor, if you take your own blood glucose because you do have insulin resistance, you can actually test this, right? You eat a stick of butter and then test your blood glucose 2 hours later, because it takes 2 hours for your blood glucose to sort of peak and go back down. Eat a steak and then test your blood glucose 2 hours later. You will barely see. You got to eat it by itself to show that it barely rises. Now, eat a slice of white bread and then test your blood glucose 2 hours later. That is where you will see a spike. Eat a banana and test your blood glucose. You will see a spike, right? Carbohydrates, all carbohydrates. Some rise your blood glucose more than others, but all carbohydrates create a rise in blood glucose. Insulin resistance happens when that rise happens so often that the cells become resistant to being able to help your body to bring in insulin to push the blood glucose down. That is what insulin resistance is. So if your blood glucose is constantly rising, right? You're eating 3 meals and 2 snacks every single day. That is going to be a chronic rise, meaning it's happening very often, and it will lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Research shows that people who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes begin to experience signs of insulin resistance as much as 14 years before they actually are diagnosed. So they start getting symptoms and signs of insulin resistance. There's many of them, right, that we should be aware of, sort of that crash that happens after you eat, right? You're eating lunch at 12, and then by 2 o'clock, you need some coffee because you're literally getting ready to go to sleep, right? That's a sign of insulin resistance. You had a huge spike and it came down very quickly, right? The body wasn't able to mitigate that because of the types of food that you're eating. When you're eating too often, it creates a chronic rise in insulin resistance. This is not about what calories you're eating. This is about the type of carbohydrates you're eating and how often you are eating them. So, as I mentioned earlier, very briefly, that it takes about 2 hours for your insulin level to rise. So, if you are checking your insulin and you eat something and you take your blood glucose a half an hour later, that is not telling you the effect of your blood glucose. You need to wait 2 hours without eating anything else so that you don't disrupt the reading. If you already have type 2 diabetes, your insulin can continue to rise for up to 3 hours afterwards, right? So think about it like this. We're talking about the ebbs and flows of insulin, right? If you're eating breakfast at 9 o'clock and you're eating a snack at 11, your insulin level has just reached its peak and it hasn't even come down, right? Your blood glucose has reached its peak, it hasn't come down. And now you're eating again at 11. Now you're eating lunch at 1 o'clock, right? Blood glucose is up. Now it's going back up. Now you're having a snack at 3 o'clock. Now it's going back up. Now you are having dinner at 6 o'clock. Now it's going back up. You spent your entire day with no rest of your blood glucose. That is chronic blood glucose. That's chronic. That is what we mean by chronic. There's no rest. So from morning to night, and then some people, right, afterwards, you're going to have some chai at 10 o'clock at night or ice cream at 10 o'clock at night. And now your blood glucose is going up again. This is what leads to insulin resistance, the chronic rise, meaning constant rise in blood glucose. If we want to reverse insulin resistance, first, we need to eat less. Second, we need to eat less often. That means you're not eating 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. I promise you, your metabolism will not slow down. That is a complete and total myth. If anybody tells you that if you go more than 2 or 3 hours without eating, your metabolism is going to slow down, run far away from them. And cover your ears too while you go. With all of the research we now have on intermittent fasting, we know that this is not the case. In fact, for your health, you should go a minimum of 12 hours without eating anything. So when I say eat less often, let me start off with giving you sort of some recommendations of how you can start this process, because there may be many people out there, it's like, but I've been eating this way for years. And if I don't have a snack, then I don't have energy. If you must snack, and I'm not talking about wanting to snack, I'm not talking about cravings, I'm talking about if you don't eat every 3 to 4 hours and you don't have any diagnosed illness, you have a sign of insulin resistance. Your body is dependent on the constant influx of carbohydrates because it is not able to tap into your stored fat for energy. The need, not the want, the need to eat and snack and graze all day long, regardless of if you're overweight or not, because again, I remind you, you don't need to be overweight in order for you to have insulin resistance, right? That is a sign of insulin resistance. When your body has the ability to say, I don't have carbohydrates, now I'm going to tap into my stored fat as energy, because our body, literally, that is the whole purpose of our body storing fat, is to give us energy when we don't have food or carbohydrates available. Metabolic flexibility is when your body can use carbohydrates when they're available, but also use fat when it's available, right? During the month of Ramadan is certainly a time when the lack of metabolic flexibility shows up for many Muslims, particularly in the first week, right? Alhamdulillah, after a few weeks, week 2, week 3, we actually start developing more metabolic flexibility, the consistency of fasting. When you have absolutely no energy, right? You just can't even move off of the couch, right? And you've done nothing strenuous and you're just fasting. That means that your body isn't able to tap into your stored fat. It was completely dependent on you giving it carbohydrates, right? Because again, if you've listened to previous episodes, hint, hint, dropping hint for you to go back to the podcast, listen to previous episode, Fit Muslima podcast on all podcast platforms, which I would like to take a quick break. And I would like to thank my listeners in Saudi Arabia for, in the first week, making the Fit Muslima podcast the #1 fitness podcast in Saudi Arabia. Thank you. Please continue to listen and share. My team shared that with me this morning, and I was very excited and very proud of you guys. So, continue to listen, share, rate. If you have not checked out my introductory episodes of the podcast on any place where you listen to your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, you can find the Fit Muslima podcast on all of those platforms. I do have 3 introductory episodes that I did not do live here on social media. So you definitely want to go check those out. I also want to take a quick break to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by Better Health, a full line of supplements to help you achieve better health. All the supplements are vegan and therefore halal, and you can get a 10% discount by entering the code podcast on the website checkout, where you can find it at getbetterhealth.com. That's get, BETTA, health.com. So let us continue our discussion on what are some of the ways in which we can eat less and eat less often to improve our health, specifically focused on reversing and preventing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So when we talk about eating less, what does the research and science sort of tells us of how often we should eat or how long we should go without eating? So there's lots of research around this. And one of the general concepts that has been teased out of the research is that everyone, no matter what your goal is, so I'm not saying everybody needs to do intermittent fasting or you're not going to lose weight, right? It's much more nuanced than that. We're not even talking about weight. We're just talking about being healthier. You need to go 12 hours without consuming any food or having any spike in your insulin level. If you feel like fasting is hard for me, I can't fast. Or maybe you don't fast during Ramadan because you have a particular health issue. Um, Maybe you feel like intermittent fasting is not really my thing. I don't want to go 18 hours without eating. Okay. You may not need to go 18 hours without eating. If you're like, this is just super hard and it's a lifestyle that I'm thinking about, but I really can't do that because I do have insulin resistance. And if I go more than 3 hours without eating, I'm not going to have any energy. At the very least, you can begin this metabolic shift by going 12 hours every day. This is not a periodic, this is creating lifestyle habits. 12 hours without eating. So that would simply mean that you tell yourself, make a rule, a boundary for your own self. I'm going to stop eating at 8 p.m. and I will not put anything inside of my mouth until 8 a.m. Do that for 40 days and see how your health begins to transition and shift. If you could do that for 40 days and notice the shift of your health. When we can go 12 hours without eating and we allow our insulin level to, our blood glucose and insulin to drop, and let me sort of clarify that just really quickly because I tend to use them interchangeably. Blood glucose is what your body glucose, let me go back. Glucose is what your body converts the carbohydrates that we eat into in order for it to travel through our blood into our cells, give us the energy and everything that we need. Right? It's called blood glucose because it enters your blood. When blood glucose gets too high, right? For people who are already diabetic or watching their blood glucose level, 140 is the cap, is what we're looking for, healthy rise, not above 140. When it gets too high, our body produces the hormone insulin to help lower blood glucose, right? So think of insulin sort of, I've explained in previous episodes that I have an obsession with metaphors. So if you're just joining me, here's your metaphor for this episode. Think of your insulin, which is a hormone, as the parking director, right? When you go inside of a parking lot and there's somebody there that's lifting the gate to let the cars in, think of the cars as all of the glucose that's coming into the system, right? Your insulin is the parking guard that lifts the gate, that allows the glucose to come in, lifts the gate, allows the cars to come in, lifts the gate, allows the cars to come in. Insulin resistance is when that gate gets rusty and that parking attendant has been doing that job for so long, he's now tired. He has had no vacation. You have been eating carbs every 3 hours for the last 10 years. So he's constantly lifting and lowering, lifting and lowering. He's tired. So he starts off by lifting the gate a little bit slower each time, lifting the gate a little bit slower. Now you have prediabetes. Yeah, it's going in. The cars are going in. They're just going in slower because the insulin guard is lifting a little bit slower, but he still doesn't have a break or a vacation. Then he gets tired, right? Now his wrist is hurting. He got carpal tunnel. He lifting that gate too much. His shoulder is hurting. Got a little frozen shoulder. He can only lift it a little bit, all right? Now you have diabetes. right? What do we need to do in order to get insulin back healthy, right? We need to give him a vacation, maybe a little bit of physical therapy, right? We actually are going to not go in the garage for 12 hours. So he actually gets to sleep because he's been up all night lifting the gate. Now he gets to sleep. That is a metaphor for how insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes happens and how you reverse it. You reverse it by bringing the guard back to health, giving him a vacation, giving him time off, allowing him to heal himself, right? And we do all of that with food. We do all of that with food. So, in conclusion, as we come to the end of this episode, I want to just sort of remind you of some of the overall concepts that we talked about and conveyed. Number one, if we want to not just improve our health, but eat closer to how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ate, then we should eat less. If we want to improve our health and also try to emulate how the Prophet ate, his habits, we should eat less often. That would mean beginning with smaller plates, no snacking at least, more time between meals, and then a full 12 hours from meal to meal. That is your starter plan. As we continue this journey together on the Fit Muslimah podcast, I hope that I can convey some tips and ideas and inspiration that's going to actually help you to practically apply some simple concepts to improve your health and well being. That is literally my sole purpose of being here, sharing with you, and being in community. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, share, and rate this podcast. And you can find me on all the social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, at Fit Muslimah, and you can join the conversation. Until next week, I'll talk to you then. Assalamu alaikum.